Suspected to be seen in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs as Keftu, it's the closest we are currently to possibly knowing what the Minoans called themselves. What we can gather from excavations at sites overseas where their goods have shown up, it's clear the Minoans made good business selling pieces of art, rare dyes, wine, olive oil, and many more luxury goods. Here in the Rekmar tomb scene, we can actually see various peoples making offerings to the vizier of the pharaoh himself. Given the amount of detail and unique attributes amongst each group, we can learn a lot about what differentiated the Minoans from other Bronze Age people in common perception. Notice how, unlike the Puntians and the Nubians, the Minoans bring no animals at all as offerings, nor are they carrying these clubs or oars, only like fine jewelry and intricate vases, presumably filled with wine and olive oil, most likely. The Minoans are also unique in that none are depicted in sandals or barefoot. All are wearing shoes that go above their ankles. Long hair is also universal amongst all the Minoans depicted in this, which is not seen whatsoever amongst the other two depicted groups, actually. And then lastly, while gold offerings are not exclusively depicted with the Minoans, they are shown to be offering more of it than both the procession of the Nubians and the Puntians combined. Despite having confirmation of their trade relations with many literate societies whose writings we have deciphered, and leaving behind two forms of writing we have discovered, technically three, but the Phaistos, that's a whole other rabbit hole, the main two being Linear A and Minoan hieroglyphs, we're still sadly nowhere close to translating what those two writing systems left for us and what the Minoans had to say about themselves. The fact we don't know what the language of the Minoans was and what they spoke doesn't exactly help either. There are all sorts of guesses, from being close to languages in Anatolia at the time to links with groups from the Eurasian plain. We simply don't know yet, unfortunately. In fact, I made an entire video debunking a guy who claimed it's somehow related to Hungarian, which it definitely isn't. You can check out that video in the description if you haven't seen it yet. What we can tell from archaeology, outside of the aforementioned prolific overseas exporting of luxury goods, is that the Minoans were really expert builders for their time and did their best to tackle the unique challenges of building on the island of Crete. We have complex road systems accompanied by even more intricate drainage systems, both of which are of such high quality that it wouldn't be rivaled until the Roman conquest, at least, of the island several thousand years later. They also built massive multi-story palaces that were incredibly engineered to withstand earthquakes as well as possible. While they used a lot of stone, stonework was held up by giant pillars of cypress trees that were far more flexible than pillars of stone, decreases the chances of collapse from the sways of an earthquake. A fun fact I learned growing up was that the pillars have the widest part at the top because they used whole tree trunks, and apparently, if they planted the trees right side up, they would start to regrow and damage the structure. Talk about some hardy trees, huh? Given how vast these complexes could get, it's easy to see where the historical nugget of truth in the Perseus myth may lay. To call these palaces labyrinthian, after all, is certainly appropriate. In fact, the myth seems to have presented several truths about the Minoans, as while there's certainly no evidence of a literal minotaur or Athenians being forced to pay the Minoans human tribute, it certainly is true that during the Minoan era, the Minoans enacted far more power and authority over the Aegean region than any individual Greek community. Thus, the human tribute to Crete part of the myth may be an exaggerated memory of when Athenians genuinely had to pay, say, a financial tribute, for example, to the Minoans, a very common practice in the Bronze Age. With Perseus defeating the Minotaur and ending the human tribute symbolic of the fall of the Minoans and the rise of the Mycenaeans, as well as, of course, the subsequent end of the need to offer any tribute to Crete. Another innovation of theirs was that the Minoans may have actually created the earliest form of type print, as it turns out.
Such signs are 242 in total and are made from 45 different stamps, likely of metal. For this reason, the disc is considered as the first example of written document made using movable type.
Wow. So when you say metal, is this probably bronze?
We don't, someone say that it could be gold.
Oh.
A very hard metal, but we do not have the proof, obviously.
Yeah, and the fact that there were stamps.
The Minoans have left evidence of their civilization to this very day all across Crete, as seen on this map here, which admittedly is slightly outdated, but not so much so for it to no longer be useful. There are 5 big palace sites at Phaistos, Knossos, Malia, Gurnia, and Zakros, with the one at Knossos being by far the largest and most famous. There are a handful of Minoan country estates, primarily along the central portions of the island. At least 7 major caves with heavy evidence of ritual have been confirmed as of 2024 on the central third of the island. 4 Minoan mountain sanctuaries that are also very prominent have also been found, in addition to countless tombs and small towns in almost every corner of the island. Combine all of that with olive trees alive today that were planted all the way back in the Minoan times, well over 3,000 years ago, and it's impossible not to be in awe of the longevity of what they've left behind for us. But interpreting what is left is arguably the biggest challenge of all historical studies in the entire Mediterranean. In lieu of being able to translate their writing, many have tried to use the beautiful Minoan frescoes as source for interpretation. For example, given how much more prominent women are than men in their art, plus very few depictions of anything that could be considered a battle or tool of war, many assert that the Minoans were a fairly matriarchal and pacifist society. An admirable attempt, but we must be cautious with such assumptions. There are countless examples from Japan to within the borders of modern Greece itself of cultures who were very patriarchal but had a woman-led pantheon, and many violent states that seldomly depicted military in their art. With that said, however, while the claim of matriarchy is still a guess, there is a lot more evidence to support the claim of relatively little warfare compared to surrounding areas, as few weapons, in addition to a complete lack of any castles or significant fortifications or major defensive walls, suggest a relatively pacifist society. While many have speculated they may have just used their navy instead as their main force, given the lack of Minoan weapons found, I am skeptical of that a bit. Just having boats isn't a defense. Those defenders would need weapons in droves, and the current evidence suggests that there was no such active systems of armament amongst the Minoans. At the moment, most if not all of our ideas as to what Minoan religious beliefs were exactly is just speculation. We don't know any of the deities' names, nor do we know how many gods were in their pantheon, if it was even a pantheon at all. However, archaeology has allowed us a small window into their religious practices.
Okay, one of the things we know a lot about is what we call ritual action. So we can reconstruct from archaeological finds a lot of the things they do. So we know that they practice animal sacrifice, they practice the pouring of liquid offerings, which is called libation, that they have processions and performances. So we can see a lot about what they're doing.
Of course, just because this new culture was thriving, that didn't mean that the titanic continental forces were standing idle, and around 3,000 years ago it all accumulated into the Thera eruption. It was a massive blast, and despite the ashfall in Crete being bad but recoverable, the subsequent towering tsunami wrecked the Minoan society to its very foundation. While the Minoan civilization carried on for a few hundred years afterwards, it is fair to say, given the eruption and no new subsequent palaces or anything grand like that ever being built again afterwards, that while the eruption didn't outright single-handedly destroy the Minoan culture, it arguably played by far the biggest role and made it vulnerable to its eventual collapse as well as eventual replacement by Mycenaean culture. So the Minoans are gone, but they have left behind their architecture and, in the case of even some trees, even life itself to the modern day. Beyond the still undeciphered linear A, which will of course reveal a lot more if we ever decipher it, is there anything else left? Well, possibly. Over a year ago, one of my friends got me an amazing book, The Minoan Mycenaean Religion and Its Survival in the Greek Religion, by Martin P. Nelson. Long title, I know. It's a very deep book, and it's heartwarming to see how much conversations with actual Greek people of the time actually played a role in the research, rather than merely armchair theory crafting, which unfortunately I've seen a couple times, especially in works from that era. Although it was published in 1927, so some of the views expressed by Nelson are scientifically dated, and there are a few points where Nelson just straight up writes in Greek, which for me as someone who could read the Greek alphabet shouldn't be a problem, but for whatever reason every single word written in Greek letters is italicized, and the print just really didn't turn out well, so they combined to make it some of the most frankly illegible text I've ever seen. It took me over a week to figure out just what this one single word even meant, because the print on it was so faint or outright non-existent. But anyways, in it he mentioned something very interesting about the Minoans, specifically their language. On page 438, quote unquote, "It is further to be noted that the old Minoan goddesses have dwindled down into biforms and the epithets of Artemis. This is certain in the case of Britomartis, who should be called Brita Martis, as the Delian inscriptions show. This name is not Greek. A gloss in Hesychius shows that Brito is a Cretan word signifying sweet, and Solinus interprets the name as sweet virgin. It can be supposed with certainty that we have here one of the very few scanty remains of the Minoan language." End quote. Now that is a big statement. If true, that is absolutely colossal. I immediately set about trying to verify this claim, as thankfully he cites the sources in the book itself. I was fortunate enough to find a free version of the Hesychi Alexandrini online, which will be in the sources list, and Nelson is only kind of right on what he claims. Yes, Brito is there, but it only has 2 words next to it. The word for sweet, indicating obviously that the word Brito means sweet, and the word for Crete. There is no evidence for how old this word is, and Hesychius gives no indication on its Greekness or not. The part about it simply not being able to be Greek seems to have been an unevidenced assertion by Nelson himself, as far as I could tell. I tried to defer to his expertise and pursue it further, assuming he must be right and I just need to find proof. But every fellow Greek speaker I've asked did not understand where his claim was coming from, that it simply can't be of Greek origin, and where that comes from on a linguistic basis. I even found a brilliant online tool that helps you search through all of the currently known linear A tablets by location, sign, etc. I tried looking for any possible variation of Brito Martis in the symbols if they had anything close to the same phonetic value that they did in linear B. So, Barita Martis, Brita Martis, Brito Martis, Rita Marti, over 20 different versions that could have plausibly come down to us as Brito Martis. Not even a single one of the over several hundred discovered tablets yielded a single line of symbols that would make any name like this. Thus, while the lack of evidence isn't proof that he's wrong, after all, most linear A writing seems to be merely recording economic transactions anyway, I'm afraid as much as it would fill me with joy to believe we have even just a single word or two passed down to us from the Minoans that we still use in the modern day, that this is simply a guess and an inadequately, substantiated claim. So all in all, there may be an ever so slight echo of the Minoans in the Greek language itself, but that is certainly yet to be a proven fact, so it's merely a plausibility at the moment. Although no Minoan words have been proven to survive down to the modern day, there are fantastic scholars on the cutting edge of this field that have managed to translate a tiny handful of Minoan words. Basic words like total and proper nouns of people, as well as some locations, are now believed to be understood. It's a humble start, but a vital one, as for a century we had no Minoan words of their language at all.
For instance, the word for total has been worked out, and we know that it is spelled like kuro. The word for deficit, most probably, which is kiro. And then there are many personal names and place names.
So that's all for the episode on the Minoans. Next episode is going to be on the ancient Greek era of Crete. If you're looking for more history content you might find interesting, I highly recommend you check out Learn Hittite's new video, as it goes far more in depth than my Peter Revesh video, and there's just a bunch of good research in that video. Yeah, highly recommend it. But anyways, love you all and have a good day.